Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very special live podcast episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm really pleased to have with me today Elvin Turner. He is the author of Be Less Zombie. In fact, I've got my copy here. Let me just get this. Be Less Zombie, and if you've been on LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms in the last couple of months, you will undoubtedly have seen this book. It's been promoted excellently, and that's because it's a really interesting book around innovation, around what companies do wrong, how they get into the stagnant state, and very practically what they also need to do to get it right and to get back to it. So, Elvin, it's wonderful having you here. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm delighted to finally be on the Nick Skillicorn show. It's a bit of an honor, really. I've been watching you from afar for a long time, so to finally be here today, lots of fun.
Perfect. So for people who don't know about you and your work, could you just give us a brief background as to where you got started and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I worked for 20 odd years actually in a boutique consultancy working in the areas of innovation, change and leadership. And I guess I cut my teeth there and spent quite a few years leading the innovation practice and really working in the areas that I do now. So it's helping large organizations figure out what comes next and how do we get there. It's the how of innovation often that they struggle with. And so most of my work now is falls into three areas. It's working with a board to figure out, well, what's the size of our innovation challenge and where do we need to get to? And then some capability development work, building infrastructure so that we can actually do innovation. And then more and more these days, actually teaching in business schools and entrepreneurship programs and MBAs and writing, hence the book.
And the book is partially what we're here to talk about today. Be Less Zombie. It's an interesting title. Zombies are these undead creatures that looking for brains from elsewhere. What are you talking about when you're telling individuals and companies to be less zombie?
Well, it started out kind of by accident. I was running a workshop in Henley Business School. And just in the moment, we decided to get all of 40 delegates. It was an exec ed course, to stand in line. At one end, we were trying to figure out who are the most unicorn companies here. So the companies who are nailing it, you know, they are worth $1 billion or more. They're still growing. It's the Airbnbs, the Ubers, the people who just seem to defy business gravity. Or what's at the other end? And zombie came up as the idea. So, you know, something that's lurching for its next meal. It's the living dead. I said, okay, go and pick your position. And everybody ran to the zombie end, which I was quite surprised at, really. But the more we dug in and looked into it, we thought, actually, this is an interesting hook, at least, to put it on. And kind of the book came from there, really. So it's really organizations who are struggling with their relevance. They can see decline. The living dead's a bit strong, but actually if you look inside some of these organizations, that's often how the people feel. They're just running as hard as they can just to keep things moving.
And what do you think separates these zombie companies from the ones that are really, to use a better, for lack of a better phrase, they're really killing it, the ones who are really succeeding?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, innovation is an argument inside organizations, and it's usually an unfair fight because the status quo is so big and powerful. In Be Less Zombie, we have this picture of a huge sumo wrestler who's called Status Quo, and there's this skinny little guy trying to push against him and fight him, and he's called innovation. And my experience when I in my work and researching for the book was that the organizations that allow and help innovation to show up on a consistent basis are the ones who are deliberate about it. They choose, come what may, the future is going to be different. What we do today will become less relevant. So we can choose, are we going to step into that even though it's going to be difficult and we're going to spend a lot of money on things that don't work? Most companies hate that. Or are we going to decide that pursuit of exploring the future whilst delivering today is a price worth paying, and decide that's going to be a superpower? That's going to be something that we're really good at. So that deliberate choice to create an environment where we can deliver today whilst designing tomorrow. So thinking about what do we need around process, resources, capabilities, culture, and leadership that will allow the behaviors to come forward that we want people to do. So often I go into an organization and the CEO's first opening statement to me is, look at our big idea cupboard and how empty it is. I tell people to innovate and they do nothing. What's up with this picture? Why aren't they innovating? And often it's because we're expecting tomorrow to show up in a context that's only designed for today. All of the metrics, all of the measures, all the rewards, all of the capabilities and processes are brilliant for repeating what we do today. They're not good for discovery. They're not good for managing failure, not good for anything really that can't be predicted.
By the way, I didn't say it at the beginning, but if you are joining us live on LinkedIn, and for all of the future LinkedIn Live podcast episodes, you can remember this as well. If you type a chat comment or a comment below this video, we'll be able to see it live. So just let us know where you're watching from at the moment, what the weather's there like at the moment. It's a really sunny day in Berlin. It's about 29 degrees, and we're not used to the heat yet here. But let me know where you're calling in from, where you're watching in from. And if you have any questions as well for Elvin or myself, because if there's specific questions that you have, we're able to bring them up on screen. And maybe if you're lucky, we'll answer them live as well. Sorry. So Elvin, getting back to you, it's this frustration that the CEOs have with where are the ideas not coming from. But in your view, is it just about the ideas, or is there something maybe more fundamentally challenging in these companies that's preventing innovation from happening?
Well, it's lots of factors. I would say being deliberate is the key one, but it's being deliberate towards what? So right now, I'm working on a project for a large utility company in the UK, and every morning for this week and next week, I'm interviewing the top kind of echelon leaders and trying to draw out of them, so why don't you do more innovation? Why don't you sponsor more of that in your team? And very quickly, a familiar picture is building. No process, or at least if there is a process, we don't know about it. No one's got time. If we do have time and a process, no one's prepared to take the risks. This familiar story starts to build around the fact that we are trying to do tomorrow's work with today's tools often. And it was interesting when I was doing the interviews for the book, I actually stumbled across an interviewee who worked on the TV show X Factor. And I was telling her what the book was about. I didn't intend actually to interview her, but it became an interview. And I was telling her about the tension that companies find in discovering tomorrow and balancing it with today and finding time. She said, "Oh, well, and the X Factor, that's really straightforward. In fact, the entertainment industry has been doing this for years." And I said, "Really? How do you do it?" And she said, "Well, we're very clear. There are two spaces. There's the performance space. And on the performance space, you're on live TV. The lights are on, the mic is on, everything is ready to go. And you are there to perform. You have to nail it. You can't miss a note. You can't sway the wrong way," because she's one of the choir masters. It's got to be perfect. And that's like the status quo. That's good business. We want to make sure that what we're doing is repeatable and predictable. She said, "But life would be very boring on TV if we didn't have another space, and that's the rehearsal space. And the rules are different in the rehearsal space. And we can fail, we can laugh, we can explore, we can do all of the things that we then refine until they're ready to go into the performance space." And I thought, actually, that's a really helpful spectrum as a metaphor to have. So what she's really saying is it's not one size fits all. You have different types of culture depending on the outcome that you're pursuing. And what I've tried to develop in the book around that idea is not only at a company level, but also at a team level, at a project level. I think more and more what we should be doing is looking at what's the outcome we're trying to create, what level of innovation, what kind of innovation does that need? If it's more in the exploratory, transformational, disruptive side, we're going to need more performance-based dynamics. It's going to be more discovery-led. It's about rewarding learning rather than certainty. It's about prototyping. It's about bringing in different thoughts early so that we can craft something that's going to be fit for purpose when we get to market. So what I'm encouraging teams to do, have done for a while now, is at the beginning of every project, if you want to get really practical about innovation behaviors and culture, which is often what we really need, that's where we need to get to. This is what it's going to take. These are the behaviors that we'll need to do. Okay, now let's design together the context that will need to be true so that we can do that work. Processes, ways of working, measures, what mustn't we do? What traps mustn't we fall into? And you're really clear and practical about how the future needs to show up on ways of working. And crucially, how are we going to stop ourselves from falling back into old ways of working? And if you look inside companies like Spotify and ING and others now, that's how they're making work show up as default. We design the context we need to do the kind of work we need to do, rather than everyone has the same culture, everyone has the same metrics, and we expect automatic genius to show up in settings where you're penalized for failing.
Where's the balance, though, between a team determining that for themselves and the leadership actually setting the criteria that all of the teams can align themselves to? And I ask that because a lot of companies say that they have a strategy and might imply that they have an innovation strategy, but in fact they don't have either. And so it's very hard for individuals or teams in the company to know this is what a good innovation would look like, or even this is the type of innovation that the executives are looking for.
Yeah, and this is one of the toughest things that I guess you and I both come into interface with a lot. The reason I wrote Be Less Zombie was I want to provide two routes, if you like, for innovation. One is the ideal world. You have a very clear strategy, not just a plan, which is often what happens. Out of that strategy, we've got a clear understanding of what level of innovation we're going to need. How's that going to show up so that we meet our growth and all of our other objectives? What portfolio, therefore, are we going to need? What questions are we trying to solve? And then teams can align behind that. And then we know that whatever innovation we're doing, it's aligned with strategy. That's the safest route. But often that is a luxury that I find in many organizations that just isn't there. So one of the things, and I've given the workshop in the book, that I encourage every team to do if they're in that situation, is to create their own version of what needs to be true 2, 3, 5 years from now. Probably 5 is a bit too far. And work back from the outcome that they know they need to deliver, and then create that pathway. And usually there will be an objective they've got to hit. Usually every team's got that. And often it's an objective that if we just keep doing the ways of working that we've been doing forever, we're not going to hit there. So it creates a kind of an innovation agenda for you. There's the gap we need to fill. And based on that, okay, so what will need to be true in 1 year's time, in 6 months' time, in 3 months' time, in different ways of working so that we can move forward. So it's not ideal, but I'm keen to help teams make progress in whatever context that they show up. And usually that means from pick somewhere in the future that you've got to get to and work back from that and co-design the environment that you need to show up.
So fighting against the status quo, being clear about what you're looking to do, and having some criteria that you're going to judge yourself against. What else have you found in developing the book and in working with companies really puts the shackles on innovation or prevents it from being as effective as it could be?
I think, well, we talked about resource. I would say number one, we don't have enough time to do the innovation that we'd like to do. We're running at 120% and we're expected to fit innovation around it. As much as I'd love to, if I put up my hand, I know I'm taking on an evening job. And if it fails, it's double the pain. And so we get this, what I call it in the book, is this creative constipation. It's, the CEO is opening the cupboard and saying there's no ideas and shouting at people or inviting people. They've got permission to innovate and nobody's moving. Well, guess why? Because I don't want more work. And if I do put up my hand and it fails, I've just put, a black mark against my CV and my prospects for the future. So there really isn't much motivation when the resources aren't there for a start to do that. So I think shackles, time, but the other one I think is fear of failure. I mean, there are many others, but the two that always come up are risk aversion and time. And for risk aversion, I mean, the work that I've seen that's made the biggest shift, I mean, for me, if you were to pick one thing that makes the biggest difference in corporate innovation, it would be moving towards teaching every employee how to design and run experiments. This whole, the lean startup movement, I think has just created such a toolkit that can, not just in product development, where we talk about, what's the smallest possible experiment that we can design to test the assumptions in our ideas before we start spending money on the ideas. This minimum viable product idea, I've kind of moved it to minimum viable X, What's the minimum viable meeting? What's the minimum viable process? What's the minimum viable governance? Because often we allow things to get far too big too quickly, or they get bloated. So the thing that I've seen often, and the thing that I encourage teams to do, if they can do nothing else, it's to learn how to break down an idea into the key assumptions that need to be true, learn how to test them with tiny experiments, because then the stakes are really low. If we fail, it doesn't matter. We spend, I did some work for one of the big drinks companies a few years ago. I was actually training them in lean startup techniques at the time. And the marketing director was at the back of the room. He was asleep. He says he wasn't, but he was asleep. And just after lunch. And so I just explained how it all works. And he suddenly woke up and said, so what you're saying is, instead of spending 50K building a prototype, we should spend 50 quid or 50 euros or $50 testing, learning whether something is true. So it's not building, it's learning. It's like, absolutely right. It's that 50,000 versus 50 idea. Now, whether you actually spend $50, pounds, euros on an idea, it doesn't matter. The fact is, it's a factor of shrinkage that suddenly makes the stakes really low. And that's really important for the big idea cupboard that's empty, because often the thing that stops people from taking that first step towards something that we don't do today is the price of failure, or the prospect of having to go through endless bureaucracy and fight your way through, because innovation is an argument. If you start really small and learn your way forward, you can delight your manager by going to them by saying, listen, I've run these 2 or 3 tests and the data seems to be trending in this direction. I think now's the time to invest in this to the next level. You're not taking gut feel, you're not taking hunch, you're taking data which gives them more certainty that the idea that they're backing has more chance of showing up, and at least we're learning whether it could be successful or not. We're not rushing to solution, which is our default. Often it's because we don't have these tools. And one of the things that I really ask people to consider when in the book is, there are so many tools out there from the startup world that we can employ right across the enterprise now that can help us shortcut some of these issues that stop innovation from showing up. So for me, experimentation has just changed the game in how innovation can show up, particularly around disruptive. I mean, you work in an incubator, right? So you must see this all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this really interesting concept of what exactly failure is, or what the fear of failure is. And the more I go into the psychology and the more I go into the research, it's interesting to see that the fear isn't of the failure itself. It's the fear of the representation of what that means for the person who did it. And people are not necessarily afraid of a marketing experiment failing. It's the judgment that comes with that. And so what I find as well, when you talk about building cultures of innovation or building up environments that support taking risks, it's being able to change the mindset around what exactly an experiment is, what it's meant to deliver, and what that representation is for the individual and the team doing it and the organization as a whole. This reframing mindset can be very powerful.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we're actually coming up on time. This is absolutely flown by, but I just wanted to leave with a final question. In the book, we've talked a lot about how you can build up these capabilities, but in some organizations, the people who actually make the decisions to allow these resources or to prevent the resources from being used, they're the ones which have these fears around risk aversion, or they're the ones who are creating a culture that doesn't support innovation. How can you get through these blockers, or maybe even turn these blockers into advocates for innovation?
I think, well, I'm not going to say there's one magic wand that you can wave and it works for everybody, because I think on an individual basis, there are some people who have just decided, I'm not moving. I've got 3 years left and then I'm out of here. I'm not changing anything. And they would never say that, but everybody knows that that's what's going on. And that makes it incredibly difficult. I wouldn't say that every situation is like that, but I think it's quite common in my experience. The thing that I have learned, though, is that in many cases, you can build confidence amongst leaders when you show them how innovation actually works, which sounds crazy. But my experience, I don't know about yours, Nick, but is that many leaders have got to where they are based on being excellent at delivering today. Certainty, functional excellence, they've risen to the top. Brilliant. That's great for running today. But they've never really been trained in how do you create an environment where other types of innovation can show up, where actually all the things that we've talked about today can happen successfully. And they may have been on a half-day beanbag session on Harvard Business School. I shouldn't say that. They've been on a business school program somewhere, and they've kind of been told some theory, but it's not enough to make it sticky and practical when we get back to the office and actually turn it on. I found, and I wish I'd learned this earlier in my career, that the sooner that you can show a pathway to how this stuff isn't black box, it's not smoke and mirrors, you can measure this, you can have processes just in the same way that you can with any other part of the business, that suddenly lifts confidence for leaders to say, okay, well, we could sponsor a small experiment here in this team and see if this stuff works. And then when it works, there's an opportunity to scale. And in the book, we talk about starting the tank, learn the lessons, move to the pond, learn the lessons, then you go to the ocean, tank, pond, ocean. And once you get the confidence of the leader that this stuff starts to work, and it can take time, but over a year, perhaps, you start to build an appetite at a senior level to sponsor more innovation further down through the organization and start to adjust some of the levers and the metrics that actually constrain innovation down in the organization. So it's articulating the how of innovation in a way that they can see instinctively, oh my goodness, actually this could work. It wouldn't be risky and flaky, which it often is. Our experience has been of, fluffy brainstorms, and we've badged creativity and innovation all in that same category and think, well, that's never going to be a serious thing. Well, go and talk to the serial innovators like Pixar and Google and all the others, and I think they'll have a very different story about how innovation is a serious business, and there is a back end that can hold that in place and make it work really, really effectively.
Yeah, if I can add to that, actually, usually when people get to the executive level, that's when the expectation that they're going to support innovation or new ideas or be more visionary about where the company should go in the future happens. But unfortunately, it's all of the steps before then along the promotion ladder that were, as you said, really based on performance and executing and grinding out this desire for new ideas. Some might really break the mold and develop a new innovation and push it through. They are unfortunately the exception that proves the rule. And so these exercises in forward thinking or in thinking about how to empower and encourage your teams shouldn't just be based at the CEO level, the executive level. I think it's something that needs to be trained in from the entire career progression system in a company.
Yeah, I think you're right. It needs to be. It's funny. I was talking to this utility earlier, and they have, because of the nature of the work they work in, it's safety first. Safety is the reflex. Everything is about safety, and so safety shows up everywhere. It's what's the reflex that we need to create around innovation so that it's second nature. And often we're not being that deliberate about it, so it's always a fight to bring it in and into the day to day.
Elvin, I know I said there was one last question. We've actually, in the interim, got a question live from LinkedIn. So if you've got a moment, just one last one. Elvin, do you help your clients develop creative thinking to drive more ideas to flow into the innovation? So is it just about the innovation frameworks, or are there creative ways to help new ideas flow as well?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I talk about the end-to-end process, and what we've talked about today mostly is the framework. And in part of that framework, and I would say all the way through, we're always looking for ways to generate, incubate ideas. And I'm quite passionate about the fact that at the moment, I'd be interested to get your view on this, Nick. I think we're really bad at understanding the science of creativity and actually making it show up in day-to-day work. So I know, right. We've got 30 minutes brainstorm Friday afternoon. We need some on-demand genius. We need some breakthrough ideas today. Are you kidding me? Everyone's exhausted. It's end of quarter. Everyone's stressed. We know that there is a state in which our minds, bodies, spirits are going to activate creativity and ways that we don't. What shuts them down? What opens them up? We pay no attention to that. We expect people like robots just to turn up. So in the book and in a lot of the work I do, and I'm sure, Nick, you're the same, I'm a real advocate of helping managers, particularly, and individuals become much more deliberate about that. These are the magnitude of ideas that we need. Okay, let's work back from when we're going to start working on those and determine how can we show up in the best state. How can we take into consideration the fact that there are going to be people in the room who just can't come up with ideas off the top of their head? I know, let's give them the questions in advance, give their minds, brains time to incubate, show up with some ideas that they've already started to work on that we can then develop in the brainstorm. But I think, yes. So the answer is yes, I do that kind of work. But I'm fascinated, actually, because I know that Nick is working on a slow burn project on how do you take the science of creativity and make it show up in business?
It's coming. It's in the works. And anyone who knows about me knows the science of creativity is what I think is really misunderstood. It's not about the brainstorming session. In fact, one of my first pieces of research that fascinated me was why brainstorming actually is less effective than people expect it to be. The science actually shows that individuals working alone first, before they come into a group, will generate more ideas, higher quality ideas, and then continue developing more ideas when you come into the group. Not only that, but also how and when new good ideas come to fruition, what distinguishes creative ideas from non-creative ideas. So this is a whole nother topic that we can talk about. But yes, you can absolutely help companies and train individuals to do short-term improvements to overcome some of their blocks to creativity, and then actually exercises to help them improve the quality and quantity of ideas that they come up with as individuals, as a group. And then the ultimate stage is, of course, figuring out how to come up with the right types of ideas. So how do you understand problems differently? How do you approach refining ideas? Because just having the ideas is very easy in most cases. It's what you do with those ideas afterwards, and allocating mental resources as well as physical time, monetary resources, whatever it might be. That's what distinguishes the individuals and companies that actually execute on these ideas, rather than the ones who want to have a cupboard full of ideas, which actually a cupboard by its definition gets shut and locks things away. So it's probably one of the least effective ways of storing the ideas that you could have. But as I said, there's a lot to talk about there. Keep your eyes open in the future. There'll probably be something coming from me. But for now, Elvin, once again, it's been wonderful speaking with you. Elvin Turner is the author of Be Less Zombie. Elvin, if people want to find out more about you, your work, your writing, the work you do with companies, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
Well, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. elvinturner.com is the website. belesszombie.com has its own website as well. Any one of those, you'll find me pretty quickly.
Perfect. In that case, Elvin, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick.